So can the Kenyan government afford to basically spend resources on all these priorities that it has? The textbook answer is yes, right? Because one of the good things about the Kenyan government, regardless of all the challenges that we have, is that it's really been growing its revenue over time. With the exception of the period around COVID, Kenyan revenue, has been growing by an average of 10% and above. Even in your own households, if your revenue is growing by 10% every year, you're doing well, right? But our expenditure has been growing faster. So the textbook answer is yes, you can manage your expenditure so that your revenue is as close as possible to your spending. But that has not been the case for Kenya for a long time, right? So our expenditure in some years was growing by as high as 30%. But our revenue, in a nice, as I said, tax is stable, is the biggest source. So a nice steady pace of about 10% is what the revenue was growing with. But the expenditure was growing at a much faster rate. So when we come to 2024, 2025, so we have a budget that is definitely higher than the revenue that we have. So first of all, that tells you we will not be able to afford it. So we have to go borrow to be able to fill the gap. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which raises concerns also on whether we'll be able to afford the budget, is the fact that all these tax targets that we've been setting have gotten more ambitious over time, which means we are missing those targets. If you look in the last 5 years, we've actually missed the targets for each of the years, with the exception of the year 2020, 2021, which we had just reopened the economy after COVID. So it was not really growth, it was just the economy opening up again. But in all the previous years, there's been an average performance of about 93%. So it means for every 100 shillings in tax we went out to collect, we were only able to collect 93 bob, right? So there's a gap of 7 shillings. When you're thinking of a budget of 3 trillion, 7% is a lot of money, right? So again, that creates a challenge on being able to fund the budget. So what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? It means, number one, that the government is still going to be very aggressively trying to raise taxes. Again, the most stable source. So you can see why they go for it. But number two is the fact that also we still have all these elements of the budget, debt repayment, services, and we're already complaining about cuts. We want that money put back where they are cutting in basic services. So more borrowing, right? So we are not getting out of the borrowing. And neither are we escaping the fact that the government is trying to raise more taxes. So from a textbook place, the government should be able to afford its expenditure, cut its spending. But practically, looking at where we are and the context of the years we are operating in, debt has to be repaid, services have to be provided. We already set a very high ceiling of what we spend money on, so we are stuck with, we can't afford it, so we have to borrow, and we have to try and raise more money to be able to meet the gap. For a long time, Kenya operated without a tax policy. A tax policy is supposed basically to provide broad guidance on how the government will go about its taxation. Right? Now, the stability of the Kenyan taxes is because there are about 3 components that happen basically when doing business and when people are employed. So you have your pay as you earn, so the income is taxed. Then you have VAT, you buy a product, there's a tax you pay for it. And then we have all these that have to do with imports and exports, right? So that also has been a big driver of the taxes. But when it comes to how we change those taxes and how we adjust them, that has been very sporadic, right? Because there was no tax policy guiding it. Right now we have one that just basically came out a few weeks ago, which now says, for example, you can only comprehensively revise taxes after 5 years. So that creates some level of predictability. So we've had challenges with predictability over time. But it's also good for me to highlight here that this unpredictability really shot up in 2023. Because if you look at the previous years, all the finance bills, right? So the place where we define what taxes we want to collect and adjust and improve on, we are always targeting to collect somewhere between 30 billion and 40 billion shillings. Then comes 2022, that shoots up to 50 billion. Comes 2023, that shoots to 211 billion shillings. And now in 2024, the aim is to collect 302 billion shillings. So even what the government is going for has really also increased during this time. And without a policy, it means a lot of these taxes were just dropping on people's laps at the whim of whatever the formulating body was thinking of. So there's an element of stability in that traditional collection has been in very specific tax areas. But the adjustments, the extra, where the extra shilling is supposed to come from, has been very unpredictable and has been one of the big challenges, especially businesses have had, because also businesses plan in the long term. So if you don't know what taxes will come in 5 years, or at least in 3 years, then it means you're not able to budget for those. So in a sense, there's a two-sided conversation of predictability because of the source, but also unpredictability in terms of how those sources will change over time. So for sure there's some case to be made that the current government is definitely dealing with challenges that came up in the decisions that were made in the previous government, and I think the debt one is definitely one that falls in that category because the previous government borrowed very heavily, and so at some point we had to pay. And it's unfortunate that it's the current government that is carrying the biggest weight of repaying that debt. So there's an element of the decisions of the previous government that are affecting the budget decisions that this current government can make because some of the challenges that they have to sort out are taking away some of the flexibility that they would have in their spending. But that does not fully explain the picture because the current government also is making decisions. And those decisions, especially on do we still continue having a big budget? Do we still need to continue running as we did? Do we still continue, especially for the national government, do we still continue putting resources into things that counties should be doing, yet counties are also getting money to do things? Are we double paying, double allocating for certain things? Those are decisions that this government seems to have struggled a bit with. So we are seeing, for example, more resources going into areas that counties should be funding. Right? The health budget has been going up over the years. And when this government came in, it continued with the trend. But you feel that there will be probably more prudence if it just let county governments run healthcare with the resources they have, because counties do run healthcare with the resources they have. And then the national government doesn't get to feel the need to run these health projects, because they are really projects, these health projects that otherwise counties should be running. So there are certain decisions also the current government is making that are affecting the position of where it is in terms of its resources, in terms of where they can put money into, and just how much flexibility they have to be able to implement their priorities. And the finance bills are a good example. 2023, big finance bill, lots of arguments around it. Citizens angry everywhere because of the amount of taxes that were coming in. Government stood its ground, made some adjustments, but it remained a pretty significant raise of resources. Now, when you listen to businesses today, and many of them have been very vocal about it, there are certain businesses that were really affected by the taxes that were introduced. So what does that mean? It basically means that if a factory closed because there's a tax that was increased on paper, right? So you are trying to raise the resources you get from paper. Who knows even if it was getting to 1 billion shillings? How many companies make paper in this country? Not that many. But you try to get 1 billion shillings. But in the process, a company is closed. You've lost corporate tax at 30%. Probably you're trying to increase the paper one by VAT, so 16%. But as you do that, you've lost 30% on one side. The people who used to work in that factory are gone. Pay as you earn, income tax at 30% gone. Right? VAT that company has to pay when they sell paper is at 16%. That's gone. Right? So we are seeing this year, and I'm hoping that these businesses will actually do even more to show just how much the government has lost, is that the decisions of this government in 2013 in the tax that they tried to raise has definitely affected certain businesses. And that then has implications on overall government revenue. So some of the struggles they are going through have to do with the decisions that they've also made. So all these cannot just be blamed on the last government. There are certain decisions that are being made now by the current government that are definitely affecting some of the budget challenges that we are seeing them deal with.